Space Rain has always struck me as one of those slightly dangerous indie ideas, the sort of game that wants to give you both the pilot fantasy and the fleet commander fantasy at the same time. A lot of games try this and a lot of games end up wobbling all over the place. But now Space Rain is finally hitting 1.0, which means this is the moment where that ambitious hybrid pitch has to become a proper recommendation, not just an interesting concept. Welcome to LT Gaming, my name is Tom, and we're two brothers obsessed with strategy games, space games, and occasionally getting too emotionally invested in your digital warship. If that sounds like your sort of thing, give the video a like, help us on the algorithm, and of course feel free to subscribe to the channel. Today we're looking at what Space Rain actually is, what the 1.0 adds, and whether it is finally the moment it goes from interesting idea to proper recommendation. So what actually is Space Rain? At its GUI core, this is a space combat game built around the idea that you're not just one hotshot pilot buzzing around the stars, you're also building and commanding your own fleet. And that is the bit that does make it stand out to me, because yes, you can get stuck into the action directly, fly ships yourself and enjoy that immediate hands-on side of combat. But the game also wants you thinking about things on a bigger level. Okay, where do I put my ship, fleet composition, support ships, my loadout, battlefield control, and all of this starts to matter as well. So it is sitting in this quite interesting middle ground between space sim and space tactics game. Not a full spreadsheet nightmare where you need 3 monitors and a minor in logistics just to move your frigate, but also not a pure arcade dogfighter either. And honestly, it's probably the main reason it stayed on my radar for so long, because there are loads of space games that do one of those ideas, but far fewer that try to blend both together in a way that feels like a proper experience. So what is actually going to land with Space Rain 1.0? Well, firstly, it's not just one of those full release updates where the number changes and apparently the game's completely different. No, there is some proper substance here, so let's dig into it. The biggest addition is probably the new cruiser class ships with light, medium and heavy variants for both factions. And that really matters because it pushes the game further into that fleet command identity. Bigger hulls, heavier firepower and more serious battlefield presence. In other words, I'm not just flying about, I'm running a war kind of energy. On top of that, 1.0 is adding support ships. I like this, think it's a smart addition. And that's because support ships can mean your fleet composition starts becoming more interesting than just asking which option has the most guns strapped to it, resupply, repair, keeping your force operational mid-battle. All of these come to mind when thinking out your tactics. Then there is the content side. There's a new quadrant, new sectors, and effectively the final chapter of the game's current arc. And having been hands-on with the game, it does give it a much stronger sense of being a more complete package than this open-ended early access experiment. There's also a hell of a lot more tools and options being added to the sandbox itself. More S3 weapons, those are the top tier, more ship upgrades, better fleet management, and a few features that sound small on paper but matter a bit more in practice, like box selection, improved collision avoidance, faster travel within sectors, all of these quality of life fixes that you really want when playing a space sandbox like this. Quick interlude from me, if you are enjoying the video, drop a like on it, help us get out there on the YouTube algorithm, and loads of you watching aren't subscribed, so feel free to jump aboard and join the LT Gaming family. Alright, back to it. Right, so beyond the headline additions, how does Space Rain actually play now? Because I think that's the real question. Luke and I have been chatting about this a fair bit because he spent a good amount of time with the game back in early access, while I've come into it through the 1.0 version. It's been very useful for honing this section in for you guys. Gives us a read on where the old pain points were, where 1.0 clearly improves things, where maybe a few rough edges still haven't completely gone away. And I think that's the right lens for Space Rain. This isn't trying to be some giant cinematic space opera like Elite, and it's not a full-blown space sandbox like X4 either. It sits in this middle ground, a space combat game that wants you to enjoy the hands-on flying, but also think in terms of fleet control, ship roles, positioning and the wider battle going on. And this side of the game has always had promise. Even going back to the early access, Luke said the actual combat was always the thing that worked best, and I got to agree with the 1.0 version too. Dogfights have energy, weapons have a bit of punch to them, and we both agree it's a lot of fun in the space combat side of things. Where I do think the 1.0 version has stepped up quite a bit is ships now serve different roles rather than blurring all into the one. Where Luke did shout out some caution to me in his experience is that he felt contracts would be a bit repetitive, progression could drag a bit, and sometimes the wider sandbox didn't always broadly support the game's full ambition. Now I can't say unequivocally that all those issues have been addressed in this release, but it's all pointing now towards a game that makes the good bits easier to reach and a bit more satisfying to stick with. And that's my experience from playing so far. Not that Space Rain has suddenly transformed into a massive genre-defining giant overnight. I do want to keep this relatively grounded, excuse the pun here. But when Luke and I compared our critiques and criticisms, it does seem like the game has found a more cohesive identity, a bit more confident you could say, and probably more like the version of itself that it was always meant to be. I will stress, however, some healthy expectations are sensible here. This is a niche indie space game with a very particular blend of ideas, and the 1.0 doesn't magically erase every issue in one go, but it has added more ship types, more tools, more tactical depth, reduced friction, and it's just a smoother route to the fun. I do think this is a more complete, more focused version of the game than it was previously in early access. So the part many of you might jump to straight away, what is the verdict for Space Rain at 1.0? And for me, with the time that I had with it, I find this is a niche but genuinely interesting space combat game that sits in this nice middle ground. It's got enough hands-on action to feel immediate, enough fleet control and tactical thinking to give battles some shape and interest, and you're not just flying to the nearest thing and hoping for the best. Now, I still don't think this is for everyone. If you're after a huge cinematic space epic with blockbuster polish, this probably isn't that. If you want an enormous open-ended sandbox where you can vanish into trade routes, politics, menus, and just being life admin for the next 100 hours, it's not aiming for that either. But if you like the sound of a space game that mixes direct combat with proper fleet command, where ship roles, your positioning on the battlefield, and control of the situation actually will matter, then I do think Space Rain is in a much stronger position now and is worth some attention from you. From Luke and mine's discussion about the game, I wouldn't frame it as an overnight transformation. I think it's just Space Rain finally arriving at the version of itself that it was always trying to reach. A more complete, more confident, and much more enjoyable take on its own hybrid idea. And for a 1.0 launch, that's honestly a pretty good place to be. Alright guys, that will do it for this video today. Let me know what you make of Space Rain. Does it tick your boxes? Have you been following it since early access? And if you want Luke and I to cover more space games like this, let us know in the comments below, name them, and we will make videos on them. Alright guys, I'll see you on the next one. Bye bye now.